So, who really hacked Sony? How much should we fear high-profile hacks of retail stores and government computers? And what, if anything, can we do to secure our smartphones and video game consoles? Today we explore the technology behind the news with an expert on the subject, Dr. Richard Ford, head of the Computer Sciences and Cybersecurity Department at the Florida Institute of Technology in Melbourne. Listen carefully for any predictions by Dr. Ford. Some of the things he warned about in an interview in late 2013 have come true in scary ways. Richard, I want to start with the last thing you told me in our last interview. I asked you, what do people in your field know is going on today that the public or news media are not aware of? And you told me, I think we have foreign intelligence services and foreign powers way into our systems at a magnitude of which we have no idea. You said our systems, to use a hacker term, are much more owned than we know, and the reason the lights are staying on right now is that it doesn't suit their best interests to turn them off. Sony? Did you predict what was going on this year? What do you make of what's happening?
So I'm glad I ended with something sensible. So, I guess I was either lucky or right, or possibly both. But yeah, it's a mess. I think the really surprising thing about Sony is that we're surprised that Sony happened, right? If you look at history, if you look just the last few years, you see big target after big target, no pun intended, getting knocked over with these cyber attacks. And Sony's probably the most public, but it may not even be the worst, right? It's just the most public.
They took email. They took things that might not normally be all that important in some places, but it was embarrassing, right?
Right. So we've seen that kind of thing actually happen before. If you go back to some of the hacks from several years ago, they would take email and index it and put it up on things like WikiLeaks. Those kind of things were happening. So yeah, and when you look at your email, when you pull things out of context or you pull private conversations about people out and make them public, they can be extremely costly and embarrassing. Some of the numbers that we've seen for estimations of damages to Sony are pretty staggering. I think that email never really goes away. And so it's a bit awkward when you see those private emails become public out of context.
These are producers doing classic Hollywood producer speak, right? They're trashing everybody and hyperventilating over Angelina Jolie and she's a baby and all these kinds of things. And there were but it sounded like there was some really sensitive information as well, including Social Security numbers for paychecks, which stars had different health problems, that kind of thing. I mean, what do you mean it doesn't go away?
So the problem is that with everything on computers now, it's so easy to exfiltrate data, right? So we can collect this data, or an attacker can collect this data within your organization, and then just in one big burst, package it all up and ship it out. So if you think about it, payroll information, Social Security numbers, all that kind of information coupled with correspondence, logins. So you type in your username and password to Facebook maybe from your office machine and poof, now I've got your Facebook account too. I'm sure I can have a lot of fun with that. But these things, everything now goes through our digital devices, often through a single point. The whole username and password thing is starting to creak a little bit under the stress that it's suffering
I know
from.
that's an area that you've done some research and development at Florida Institute of Technology.
Absolutely. We have some researchers like Dr. Heather Crawford, one of our newer faculty members, who's very interested in these kind of areas. She does interesting work and interesting thinking about the way that passwords and authentication might change in the future. And we have these wonderful devices now, cell phones, right? So not only do I have a computer, I have a cell phone. So you can start doing things like two-factor authentication where I log in, and if it's a new device I'm logging in from, the system will send me a text with an extra piece of security information that I then have to provide. So they know that not only do I know the username and password, but I also have the cell phone and can read texts on it. So that's a way to increase security.
Is that when we see somebody say, they send you a picture and they say, type in what you see here?
Well, when you send somebody a picture, often that's a captcha. It's a way of saying, are you a robot or not? Because computers are not good at figuring out pictures. But this would be, say you log in from a new computer to an account. The system can recognize it's a brand new computer. You've never logged into this before, but you got your username right and you got your password right. It can send you a text to say, Matt, is this really you? If it is, then give me this extra piece of information that it just sent you. That's an effective way of making the system more secure at the consumer level. That works pretty well.
With Sony, there's speculation as to who did it, right?
Yes.
I mean, there's North Korea going back to these foreign intelligence services. There's also speculation that it might have been some disgruntled former employee and some local people in LA. What's your take?
I think my take is that we don't really know. So attribution in these systems is very difficult. So you can look at the pieces that are left on the floor after everything broke. And looking at some of that evidence, you would say that the people involved were Korean. Some of the software was compiled. When you compile a piece of code with a high-end compiler, it leaves some fingerprints of the language pack, for example, of the machine that compiled it, and that was Korean. But on the other hand, if you're a hacker and you're not stupid, I could set my language to, I don't know, definitely not English, maybe French, and now I've got a different set of fingerprints. So that kind of forensic analysis, it's easy to plant a false flag. So what was done in the public, at least, because there's some classified stuff here and there's a bunch of public data, right? So in public, what happened is you look at the modus operandi of the criminal, just like you would in a normal criminal investigation. So you'd say the safe was forced and they got in through a window and they took such and such a thing. Oh, it's likely to be this particular person or this particular gang of criminals. Do the same thing with cyber. You say, this is how they got in, these are the type of tools they used. Once they got in, this was the kind of thing they did. This fits the MO of a particular group of people. The problem is that kind of attribution, it's easy to plant what we'd call a false flag. So I'm going to act like somebody else or use somebody else's tool set in the hope that I draw the fire onto somebody else. So you have to be careful with that kind of attribution. It's very difficult. And then you've got attribution in the classified world, where you use other covert channels. So maybe if I've got your phone tapped, for example, I might know exactly whether it was you or not because I know what you did that day. But I'm not going to tell everybody I had your phone tapped or your line tapped. So this is where it becomes very difficult when we do attribution of these public events because you have classified data or data that's really government only or where we're not prepared to give our source for that data. You have public data. The other challenge is that it's difficult to draw a clean line between you're a nation state and you're just a rogue group of hackers, right? The nation states leverage these people all the time to do their work for them.
Yeah, and so if I watch 24 or The Blacklist, it seems like the little hacker outfit is always a bunch of mercenaries someplace that they wind up hiring to cover their tracks. And so there are groups out there that are hired guns? Or?
There absolutely are groups out there that are hired guns. There are groups out there that are true believers, and there are groups out there that are somewhere in between. And it's extremely difficult to tell using public information sources exactly who's doing what. You often see people making claims, oh, it was such and such a hacker group, or a group will come forward and say, oh, this was part of Anonymous. But these things are often hard to verify. The information, once it gets out, they get spread around. So even if I gave you your username and password, it doesn't mean I did the deed. It just means somehow I get hold of somebody who had your username and password. Maybe I bought it.
Yeah, it seems like we have two stories, and they're two firm stories. One is the government story, which is that it was North Korea somehow, and the other story is I see in print at least, or in news reports, is that these cybersecurity analysts are looking at the footprints or the fingerprints and saying, well, this has the MO of some other group, not North Korea. Somewhere in between there is some information that reconciles the two.
It's actually not even clear that both sides could even be right. In other words, maybe it was subbed out, right? I've certainly looked at attacks where you've had two groups of people in the same system at the same time, and it makes the forensics much more difficult. And as you start peeling them apart, you suddenly realize that you have two breaches, not one, going on simultaneously. Oh. And that can make life more difficult. If you look at the tools that were used in that attack, they weren't really high-end tools too, and that's another big takeaway. It's not like this was rocket science, right? This was predictable, relatively easy. The system that they used to wipe some of their machines was very straightforward. It was a well-known tool that attackers have used before. So, I mean, you recompile them.
What is a tool in your world?
So a tool for me is just any program that I'm going to deploy on your computer to carry out a particular purpose. So for example, to really wipe a hard drive is actually quite difficult. So you have to upload a specific tool to do it. And that's what I'm told happened in exactly this hack. That a specific type of tool was uploaded, and it was a relatively well-known tool, and basically the trigger got pulled and some of that data was destroyed.
Wow, that's amazing. There's been so many stories in the past year about hacking. I wondered which of the two sort of common threads you find more threatening, if one is possible. On one hand, we had these big box private stores. Target, I think, was actually 2013, but Home Depot, Michaels, a couple of other stores were hacked, credit card numbers were stolen, that kind of thing. At the same time, we had a succession of reports about Chinese hackers, potentially the government getting into our national weather system, the Postal Service, information on dams. Is there one of them? Are they both equally terrifying, or should one?
They're
is
both
one more
equally terrifying because there's. It's not even clear that they're separate people. If you were a hacker working for the Chinese government, you may be tempted to do some extracurricular activities, for example, right? You know, if I could scam 60 million credit cards easily on my spare time, I might do that. And these people are not as well. They're not well behaved. I mean, hackers tend to be hackers, right? They like to do their own thing. So it's a very, very messy world. It's not even clear who's behind what. Sometimes it's organized crime, sometimes it's individuals, sometimes it's governments, and sometimes it's a sort of ugly mix of all three. So the whole thing is a mess, and it doesn't look like it's getting any better as I look at 2015. I'm not particularly hopeful that this is going to be a good year for us. It'll be a good year for my consulting. I'm sure it'll be a good year for my research because there's going to be plenty to consult on and plenty to do research on. But in terms of the overall health of this electronic infrastructure that we're building, I think we should be concerned because we're doing more and more and more and pulling in more and more threads into our electronic infrastructure. And that's great because it's exciting. But it's worrisome when we have groups that can engage in what we call asymmetric warfare. So if a small group of people can cause Sony so many hundreds of millions worth of losses, that's deeply asymmetric. The cost of the attack was minimal. The effects of the attack were huge. Asymmetric attacks worry us because we can't defend against them cleanly. Sometimes the cost of defense is, you know, substantial, especially when compared with the cost of the attack. So you get into this sort of war of attrition, which is very unhealthy.
And it's one of those things where just as soon as you get the defense in place, they come up with a new way to breach the security.
That's right. It's a continually moving target. A new defense gets put in. And also, people don't change, right? So if I really wanted to break into your offices, I would probably say, hey, Matt, check out this cool USB drive I'm sending you in the mail. Right, and I'd wait for you to plug it into a machine. I don't have to be high-tech. People are always going to be people, and they're always going to be the weak link. So phishing, spear phishing, is an effective way of breaking into a company. You don't have to breach the firewall. You just have to get somebody to carry something through for you often. And that can be very effective. And you're so connected to the outside world now. You surf the web, researching stories. You open attachments, I'm sure, that people send you. You know, and there are a lot of ways that I can reach out and touch your computer without necessarily breaching your firewall.
And every time I turn something on, it wants to sync with something else
exactly
that I already have. And boy, it's mind-boggling. Tell me a little bit about what you and your department are working on at Florida Tech.
Well, we're doing a lot right now. I think our research expenditures within computer science are bigger than they've ever been. I've changed position, and now Dr. Marco Cavallo is running the Harris Institute and doing an outstanding job.
And congratulations, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much. And so, you know, we're working on some pretty fun things. There was a Cyber Grand Challenge put out by DARPA, which is about can computers attack other computers and defend themselves in the process. And we're doing a little bit of research on that.
DARPA is the defense... This is their research arm. This is the skunk works.
Exactly right.
Okay.
It's a public program. It's really exciting stuff. And the idea is, can computers engage in capture the flag competitions? That's a sort of exciting
Can
idea.
they fight it out without us really
without
having
the person,
to push the buttons?
person involved in the loop.
Okay.
And that's a really interesting project that we're doing a little bit of work on. We're always doing a lot, well, we basically do a lot of work, obviously, for DoD. And we have a lot of customers there who are very happy with the kind of research we do. In resilience, we do work trying to look at, can you make machines more resilient to attack? So in other words, not just have a thick wall around the machine, but if something gets through, can it push back a little bit? Can it defend itself, or is it just going to be a sitting target? So that kind of work is always exciting, and year on year we just keep moving the ball forwards, and we're excited. Our customers are happy, and we're happy.
You told me once about, I'm going to digress here a little bit because it was just such an interesting tidbit that you told me about, and it was somebody was doing an experiment, and I think they were doing it on your computer while you were working, trying to keep people focused on work, and there was some sort of time limit in which you couldn't change tasks more frequently than every 5 minutes or something like that. You had to stay focused. How did that turn out?
I actually think we saw some products now that you can get that help you do that. That was really something that we were doing to help me with my own time management challenges, because your machine is a distraction box, right? It's designed to make you want to do something different all the time. Actually, it worked out for me very well to retrain how I use my devices. The mobile phones are another great example, right? So we've been chatting probably about 15 minutes, I would guess. And neither of us has checked our phone, which is probably the longest you've gone all day without checking an email or checking for texts or checking your phone. And it's a bit strange how we've become so challenged with remaining on task in this sort of continual cyber world. And that's particularly difficult for our kids.
Yeah.
Because it's new to us. It's all they've ever known. That's very challenging for them.
I have that problem all the time. I'll be starting to work, and I'm thinking that I'm going to knock out a story or I'm going to do something by deadline, and then I think, wait, where was I? And I look down and I have all these things open, social media and email and all these things that are chirping for my attention all the time, a calendar thing that pops up, and it's absolutely amazing. Well, we'll get back on track here. I wanted to ask you a little bit about some things that have come out and things we should be thinking about as consumers a little bit.
Sure.
The new thing that I heard about this year were these game consoles that were really popular. We had the Sony Xbox and another one that came out, and I guess it was all tied into the Sony hack, right?
Potentially. So it's interesting. There was a group that claimed responsibility. Again, we're back to this whole attribution problem.
Right.
For taking down it was sort of the Christmas Day denial of service attack, right?
That was a bummer for a lot of kids.
It was. It really was.
Some older kids. but.
And it's interesting because there are some stories, or there's some claims that those two are related, and there are some claims that they're really different groups and different issues. It speaks to this challenge of denial of service in general, where I'm going to stop you. I'm not going to steal your information necessarily, but I'm going to stop you doing what you want to get done.
I want to mess with you.
Yeah, it's just as disruptive in many ways. It's a real mess. And the problem is that even there are some groups, or there have been some reports, that there was some insider action that enabled some of those attacks. I mean, whether those reports are credible or not is difficult to say. But this is another big problem that we're going to start seeing. And we've always, as defenders, we've always known about the challenge of the disgruntled insider.
Right.
But when you look at how networks are laid out and how computer systems and infrastructures are built, a disgruntled insider can just bring your network to its knees, because all your defenses are facing outwards, right? All your cannons are facing away from your own infrastructure. Right. And this insider threat is going to be something that continually grows as a problem.
I mean, we all know about Edward Snowden, right? The NSA insider, and look what he was able to do.
Exactly right.
Think about that on a corporate level, or individual company, and who has access to information and passwords and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you don't realize what's in your email, for example, till you lose it. You don't realize how sensitive some of the things are that you send until you suddenly face the reality that yeah, exactly. So, an insider is extremely dangerous. Insiders can be bought, they can be turned, or they could just be unhappy and looking for an outlet. And I think that's a challenge that not just American businesses, but businesses worldwide will have to deal with. One of the challenges of being here in America is we really are a world leader in what we do. And the problem with being at the pointy end of things is that we run into these problems, and they're bigger for us perhaps than they are other places, and so we have to figure out how to solve them first.
And we can be world leaders corporately at squeezing people, right, until they get a little bit frustrated, and who knows how people are going to react to that. Well, okay, so if I am a consumer today, there's a new batch of cell phones that have come out, as always. Here are my game consoles that only seem to work if they're connected to the internet. What kind of precautions should I be thinking about taking?
So the advice, unfortunately, is always the same, right? So it depends on the type of cell phone. For example, Apple has its beautiful walled garden, so you're kind of a bit safer in many ways,
Okay.
because you're limited in what you can do. Whereas in the freewheeling world of Android, you can pretty much install anything you want on your phone, and because you can install anything you want on your phone, you can install bad things on your phone more easily. So there's that philosophical difference. So speaking to Android, you should think carefully before you install things from other places.
Okay.
Right? You should think about the fact that if you install a game and it's free, it's probably not free. You're the customer in some way.
You're the
right?
product, right?
You're the product.
There's
right,
some
exactly.
way that
Somebody's
they're
making
monetizing
money
you.
somewhere.
Okay.
And that might be a price you're prepared to pay. It might be, you get a little ad within the application, and that's fair. I don't think consumers have a problem with that. Or it might be something, where it's asking for permissions to look at your contacts, and these things can be quite tricky.
That's
to
a little
sort
scary
out.
to me. I have Facebook, right? Like a lot of billions of people do, and on my phone it said, "Well, we've moved all your messages to this other program, and if you want to participate in that, we want access to everything on your phone. We want all your information, where you are, all these kinds of things." And I just think, ooh, that's really pushed me right to that line of how much am I willing to share.
And I think that the problem is you don't realize the value of what you're sharing. Only when if you look at any point on a line, it doesn't tell you much. But when you see all the points linked together, you can see a trajectory, and that trajectory tells me exactly what I want to know about you. And I think that we don't realize how much of that information we give away and how much can be inferred by looking at that information. I think we touched on this last time we spoke. It was the question of who really owns our lives. And I think that, again, this is one of these things where we started the machine in motion, but we won't really see the consequences for quite a long time. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
We are creatures of habit. We follow patterns in our everyday lives. If somebody has point A, point B, and point C of the things that we do and the stuff we like to buy, they can infer, like you said, that I'm likely to be at this store on a Saturday buying such and such.
Right, or a store might infer that, say, someone's wife is pregnant based on the purchases before they even know, right? Before the husband knows, and these things are really interesting. Big data is interesting. You can make predictions, and again, we'll see big data starting to change things quite a lot. We already do. It's just very subtle right now.
Like how?
Well, I think that if you think about how you get marketed things online, right? You search for something, you start seeing ads, right? That's not really big data. That's actually fairly straightforward. But your buying patterns can be predicted. So that real estate on the screen can be controlled in a much more intelligent way by analyzing what are you actually likely to buy. There's no point in me showing you an ad for something you're not likely to buy. So I can increase my revenues by being much more intelligent in what I try and sell you.
That's a challenge in our business. I work for a commercial media business, and the expectation now among people who do advertise is that things be so targeted and so niche-oriented and deliver a certain amount and it's so much smaller sometimes than the global, the universe of eyeballs we used to be able to deliver or say we were delivering. They don't want to pay as much, and so it's exploding the whole industry, and finding that kind of commercial base to do new media is one of the challenges in making things change.
The market's very saturated right now, right? So, when you go online, you're almost blind to the ads. I think I told you once about some of the eye tracking studies that we've done. There are a lot of eye tracking studies where you can look at where somebody's eyes are when they're looking at a computer screen. And you can see using a heat map that the banner ads are pretty much not looked at, right? The eye just drifts; it doesn't really get there. And I think that saturation makes those ads more difficult to place. So there's only two routes to go. One is to go more aggressive and really get the ad where you can't click
Drops
through
down,
it.
it's playing trumpets.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Or you make them very targeted. And those are really the only two directions you've got to go in terms of getting return on that investment.
Interesting. the thing that we're hearing about out of the Consumer Electronics Show is the Internet of Things. I'm not sure whether to be really excited about this, as the CEO for Samsung is describing. He's saying we're going to have all of our devices, from our dishwasher to our thermostat, to our refrigerator to our car, gathering data and analyzing it somewhere to make our lives much more convenient and happy and maybe more efficient. On the other hand, here's all this stuff that's connected to the internet. People were so concerned a few years ago when we had what they called smart meters on our houses, these little boxes that just blinked out, the amount of electricity would be used each year. Imagine if we have somebody somewhere reading everything that's going on in our house. What do you make of it? Is it a threat, or is it an opportunity?
It's both, right? I mean, these things are always double-edged. It's exciting. I think the Internet of Things is cool. I think it's a great piece of branding, because this has really been coming for years, right? And high-end disk storage systems used to phone home and let the vendor know there was a problem before the person who was using it knew that was a problem, for example, right? This idea of more connected devices has been going on for quite a long time. It's just now we've wrapped it up under this sort of cool title, and technology has gotten far enough that they're small, they're low power. I mean, I use a lot of connected things in my house. I've got lights that I can control from my cell phone. It's a lot of fun. As soon as I leave here, my phone will automatically let my wife know that I'm on my way home. She'll get a little card on her, Google Now, which says, Richard's on his way home. It didn't require anything.
Oh, that's very nice.
It just understands my calendar, and it can see where I am. And that's creepy, and it's also really handy. So the problem is that, we can see how these things are useful. Seeing how to abuse them, that takes a bit more time. For example, with a true Internet of Things, I could drive past your house and know you had a really high-end television, for example. I could probably do that today. That's useful if I'm a burglar, right? Oh, Matt's got the latest and greatest, Samsung Quad HD television. And I can see that his cell phone isn't beaconing that he's here, so now I know you're not home.
Oh, I see.
And there's some really interesting crimes that these things might enable. I'm not saying this is happening today. I'm saying that we haven't really thought through some of the implications yet, or seen how they'll play out in the real world, because just because something is possible doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen.
Well, we'll make that the last thing we say today, and maybe the first one when we come back and talk again. Well, that's our program. To comment on anything you heard here, send an email to me at mreed@floridatoday.com, or look for me on Facebook or Twitter. We'll see you right here next week on The Matt Reed Show.